talk about like anarchism because you mentioned that in the beginning, and people are probably going to be fearful of that. So where does that come in? Like, how did like first of all, maybe if you want to share your experience, like how did you become a voluntarist or an anarchist in the sense of like I realize I'm not beholden to some authority. Like, how was your journey about that? How did you get there? Because a lot of people, aren't there, and it's a very new concept in this world.
I mean, the short answer is COVID, but the long answer is in 2008, I saw a Ron Paul election sign.
Hmm.
And I was like, who's this guy, Ron Paul? I never heard of this guy, Ron Paul. And I was working at a construction company, and they were like, yeah, actually, he's a really, the guys I worked for, they were wise enough in the way of the world, but, they were still Republican Democrat. And
Hmm.
so they're like, well, he's this independent guy. Like, yeah, he says a lot of great things, but like, he doesn't really have a chance. And then where I was from in Massachusetts, I saw lots of Ron Paul signs. So I started listening to this guy, Ron Paul. And I'm like, yeah, this is the guy. If there was ever a guy, Ron Paul would be the guy. And then,
Hmm.
they stole an election, whatever you want to say. I don't know if it was 2008 or 2012. I think it was 2012 when they just pretended he wasn't even a candidate. But anyways, 2008 is kind of what introduced me to libertarianism. And, when I started to learn more about it, I'm like, yeah, this is how I've felt like my whole life, like the principles of libertarianism, whether it's the non-aggression principle or principles of self-ownership. Like I didn't really get into all of that then, but I just was like, yeah, I'm going to start calling myself a libertarian because I know I'm not what these other people are.
Sure.
And then kind of got away from that and got pulled back into the left, right. And, um, when COVID happened, that's when I really delved into, more podcasts. I was working outside every day, which probably benefited my health tremendously. And Pete Quinones and Tom Woods and Dave Smith, and then finding Legal Man. I mean, Legal Man has been the one that he's the only subscribe podcast I subscribe to and pay for. I've interviewed Legal Man.
Hmm.
I've had, off the record conversations with Legal Man, and he's been somebody that's really helped me not waste time with things that I think people spend so much time caring about and commenting about, and they're just their whole lives are caught up in this
Sure.
political nonsense. And as soon as I realized that pretty much everything we're told is a lie, the I think it's credited to Solzhenitsyn, but I don't think he actually said this. But they know they're lying. We know they're lying. They know that they know they're lying, and yet they're still lying. Um, so as soon as I came to grips with, you know, where we are in the world, what the situation looks like as far as this digital prison, which is slowly closing in on us, the control systems are, government just gets bigger and bigger for 250 years since this country started. It's only gone in one direction. And to me, it looks pretty bleak as far as, are we going to be able to turn this around before it's too late? And that's kind of where I just decided, you know, do I still pay my property taxes on my home? Yes. Do I still, get money taken out of my paycheck every week at the job I have to work at? Yes. So there's things that are out of my control, but I don't let them get into my mind, because that's what
Sure.
government is mind control. And so, like during the whole pandemic, there was maybe less than a handful of places I actually strapped a mask on my face and went into, because I, whatever it was, I needed to do that more than I cared about my freedom to not wear a mask, because they don't do anything anyway. But, um, you know, I was steadfast during the pandemic and got thrown out of places for not wearing a mask. And, I just um, kind of at a point where I'm sure you are as well, where there's there's nonsense that we don't have to deal with, and then there's nonsense that we can stand up for and say, I'm not going to play this game. I'm not going to be a part of this. And for me, it was COVID that really, and I hate to say COVID because I do try to correct myself, because people are like, oh, COVID shut down businesses. No, the government shut down businesses. COVID didn't shut down
Sure.
anything. COVID's apparently still around, if you want to believe in that. And so,
Yeah.
that was my journey and what led me to where we are today.
Yeah. I find it interesting because you have this merge between people who are in health and people who talk about freedom ideas, and then you have this convergence now between people who are growing food and people with health and people who are care about freedom. And it's like, yeah, because freedom is important in all aspects of life. I mean, even I studied like the psychologist Dr. Carl Jung, and in his last book, he's constantly talking about the individual and their struggle for freedom. It's pretty apparent. That's what a lot of people are looking for. And maybe it's why there's a lot of mental ailments in, that we see happening in the world. I don't know. I think it has to do with it. And people feel constricted, and even more when they're put into a state of lockdown or they're, suppressed in different ways. They want, or they're eager for, they have a true desire for freedom. And in the same way, when a disease takes over the body, their body is no longer free to do as it wants, to breathe properly, to produce certain nutrients as it desires. And I think we're just basically creating or nurturing what is already there in nature and allowing it to express. And I think food forests are a perfect example of that, working with what is and showing like this is what's possible. So for me, like voluntarism is about, okay, we trade as human beings. We naturally create voluntary interactions on a daily basis. And people are not going around, coercing others. There's a very small faction of people who do that. And they often do it because they create their own mental justifications in their own head. They think it's right, or they don't consider that it's right. And so there's an ignorance involved. But see, just because those few people are evil does not justify us creating a whole system and committing evil on a daily basis to prevent possible evil. And that's what we've done with creating these systems, at least from my point of view, when quite literally it's in our nature to have voluntary interactions and to engage in these community projects and not to worship some authority figure. Like, where did they get that from? But instead, most people think, yeah, that's normal to have some authority figure like Putin or Obama or Trump and like look at these people as like idols and then talk about them nonstop. Like you said, it's almost like, gosh, they must be part of our lives. Like they must be part of our family. Like we know who they are and everything about them. Like, no, we don't. They're strangers miles and
Right.
miles away. But we talk about them as if they are directly in our lives. And then they enter our lives. And then we wonder why, the government is getting so like encroaching upon our freedoms. It's because we give them permission to. We open the door. We're like, here's the seat and it's furnished really nicely for you.
Mm-hmm.
Whether we're voting left or right or whatever, because we're creating that position in authority. But authority never gets challenged. And that's what I call statism, right? Is that belief in authority. And so people aren't aware of voluntarism or statism or these ideas. And especially, I think, in most of the gardening communities, and people like to stay in their boundaries. They don't want to go outside, and I can understand that. It's like, oh, it's too controversial. I don't want to talk about that. I like the fact people like Jim Gale, who, by the way, used to be very, influential, had a lot of money, got out of that world, had a spiritual experience, and realized, wait, there's much more to this life. And then he started realizing, why not talk about all those things? They are affecting us. Let's be outspoken. Let's be free spoken. And so people can't be afraid. There is like that necessary sacrifice to break the barriers, to create innovation, get outside our boxes. People for so long have been complying and just doing what they're told, right? I think getting out of that is realizing, okay, we don't need that. And we also don't need more talking heads like me necessarily online saying that. We need to put it in action in real life. And that's why I'm trying to create these different projects and experimenting with different things we can do, especially since online, they can take you off at any moment. And, we see a lot of problems that we can just look at every little thing. But instead of looking at the problems, let's look at the solutions. Let's build it. Right. And then that's why I think it's easy for somebody in our community to be like, oh, well, there's no hope because they haven't done the networking that you and I have done to see what is possible in person. Because when I see that in person and when I meet people like you in person, the inspiration is just out the roof and there is no negativity. There's much more positivity.